You're listening to the N2K Space Network.
And now a word from our sponsor, SpyCloud, the leader in operationalizing cybercrime analytics. Traditional threat intelligence is a thing of the past. Cyber criminals are stealing vast amounts of credentials, session cookies, and financial data every day, and it's hard to keep up. SpyCloud is the trusted partner businesses turn to fully understand their darknet exposure risk and neutralize threats before it's too late. SpyCloud alerts your organization as soon as an employee or customer's data appears on the darknet, so you can act faster than bad actors to prevent cyber attacks like ransomware, session hijacking, account takeover, and online fraud. With insights from the industry's largest repository of recaptured data, protect the digital identities and systems most important to your business. Get your free corporate darknet exposure report at spycloud.com/cyberwire and see what information criminals have in their hands today. That's spycloud.com/cyberwire.
As one of the great philosophers of our time once said, a scrub is a guy who thinks he's fly and is also known as a disappointing end to a launch. No, we don't want no scrubs, but they are pretty inevitable. Sorry, Starliner, but when human beings are atop those rockets and tons of propellant, you absolutely cannot be too careful. And remember, well, scrub happens, but then you fly.
T-minus 20 seconds to LOS speed rest. Go for deploy. Roger roll.
Today is May 7th, 2024. I'm Maria Varmazis, and this is T-minus. Starliner launch gets scrubbed. Privateer Space raises $56.5 million and acquires Orbital Insight. Rocket Lab completes its Archimedes engine. And our guest today is friend of the show and DC-based space policy expert Brendan Curry. Brendan and I spoke about his 2009 trip to China to visit their space assets. And it's a great insight into what we're all watching play out today in China, so stay with us for that chat. Let's take a look at our Tuesday Intel briefing, shall we? And it's a scrub for yesterday's much-anticipated Starliner crewed flight test. And it's not Boeing's fault, so everybody please stand down on that one. It was a noisy oxygen pressure relief valve on the Atlas V's Centaur second stage. It's always a valve, isn't it? At a press briefing last night, ULA President and CEO Tory Bruno said while they were able to get the valve to stop buzzing, making a change in the Centaur's state with a crew aboard, according to ULA's flight rules, automatically triggers a scrub. So that is exactly what happened about 2 hours before the planned launch time yesterday. NASA says the next launch attempt for Starliner will be no earlier than this Friday evening Eastern Time, May 10th. And should the problematic valve need a full replacement, ULA's Tory Bruno also noted that the launch attempt is really much more likely to be next week. In any case, we'll share more details once the specific launch time is announced. Privateer Space has raised $56.5 million and also acquired analytics firm Orbital Insight. The new funding allowed Privateer to close the deal to buy Palo Alto-based Orbital Insight on April 17th. The merger will add mapping and intelligence services to Privateer's space data offerings. Privateer Space is led by Apple co-founder Steve Wozniak, a.k.a. The Woz. Privateer closed its Series A funding round in April, according to an exclusive report by Reuters. On to a slurry of Rocket Lab news now, starting with their Q1 financial report. The company closed the quarter with more than $1 billion in backlog. It held 4 successful launches this quarter from the United States and New Zealand, and is predicting between $105 and $110 million in revenue for the second quarter of this year. The launch company also used its update to announce that it has completed the first full assembly of its new 3D printed, reusable rocket engine for the Neutron medium lift launch vehicle. Rocket Lab has now begun an intensive test campaign of the Archimedes engine, and it will feature a number of engine system activations leading up to a first hot fire. And the Neutron rocket launch schedule has been adjusted to no earlier than mid-2025. And Rocket Lab has also completed the selection of subcontractors to provide payloads and ground systems for the 18 satellites that the company is developing for the U.S. Space Development Agency. The launch company is the prime contractor for a $515 million firm fixed-price agreement to lead the design, development, production, test, and operations of 18 satellites for SDA's Tranche 2 Transport Layer Beta as part of the Proliferated Warfighter Space Architecture, or PWSA. And as for the subcontractors, Cesium Astro will provide its Vireo active electronically scanned array radio frequency communications payload. The payload will be the first multi-beam capable Ka-band communication system operating in SDA's PWSA. Another subcontractor, Mynaric, has been selected to provide Condor Mark III optical communications terminals. And then there's Seeker Engineering, selected to provide the tactical satellite communications known as TAC-SATCOM, software-defined radio, or SDR, and the network encryption system. Collins Aerospace will be providing the waveform for the SDR, which is the software and firmware required to transmit and receive TAC-SATCOM. Redwire Space will provide antennas and RF hardware. And last, but certainly not least of these subcontractors, Parsons will provide the Nebula Operations Vendor Architecture, which will be Rocket Lab's ground system for managing operations for its 18 satellites. And speaking of contract partnerships, Sidus Space has announced that it's a teammate on the NASA Lunar Terrain Vehicle Services contract. And that contract was awarded to the Intuitive Machines-led Moon Reusable Autonomous Crewed Exploration Rover, or RACER team, which was announced earlier last month. The contract is for the first phase of developing a crewed rover for human exploration of the moon's surface. The National Geospatial-Intelligence Agency, also known as NGA, has announced its first commercial solutions opening to provide direct-to-warfighter commercial analytics for maritime domain awareness. The goal of Project AGIR is to identify a multiple vendor approach for developing a commercial sensor architecture capable of tracking and monitoring illicit maritime activity. Commercial vendors will work collectively to establish tasking algorithms for tipping and queuing a diverse array of sensors, conduct analysis, and deliver wholly unclassified, shareable intelligence of illicit maritime activities in the Indo-PACOM area of responsibility. More details can be found by following the link in our show notes. And the NGA is creating a hub for space intelligence collection and decision-making that it hopes will provide collaboration amongst government agencies. The center, which the agency refers to as JMMC, is still in the concept phase. And China today launched a new Long March 6C rocket. The new 43-meter long rocket has a liftoff mass of approximately 215 tons and is capable of delivering a payload of about 2.4 tons to a 500-kilometer sun-synchronous orbit. The inaugural flight transported 4 satellites from the Taiyuan Satellite Launch Center in northern China. And that concludes our briefing for today. Head to the selected reading section of our show notes to dig deeper on all the stories that we've mentioned. We've added an article in there on NATO's plans to defend space, the UN General Assembly's response to the Russian veto of the space arms race resolution, and an announcement of a new appointment at AST Space Mobile. Hey T-Minus crew, if you're just joining us, welcome! And be sure to follow T-Minus Space Daily in your favorite podcast app. And also, if you could do us a favor, share the intel, aka this show, with your friends and coworkers. So here's a little challenge for you. By Friday, please show 3 friends or coworkers this podcast. That's because a growing audience is the most important thing for us, and we would really love your help as part of the T-Minus crew. So if you find T-Minus useful, Please share the show so other professionals like you can find the show and join the crew. Thank you so much, everybody. It means a lot to me and all of us here at T-Minus.
The IT world used to be simpler. You only had to secure and manage environments that you controlled. Then came new technologies and new ways to work. Now, employees, apps, and networks are everywhere. This means poor visibility, security gaps, and added risk. That's why Cloudflare created the first-ever connectivity cloud. Visit cloudflare.com to protect your business everywhere you do business.
Our guest today is friend of the show and DC-based space policy expert Brendan Curry. Brendan spoke to me about his time visiting the Chinese space program in 2009 and what the United States can learn from China's approach to space.
I was fortunate enough to be with the Space Foundation at the time. And that year for the Space Symposium, the foundation awarded the Shenzhou 7 mission the Space Achievement Award. And they were also very appreciative of receiving the award and offered to have a delegation from the foundation come and visit and see some of their facilities. And so that was done in the fall of 2009. And we were fortunate to see their spacecraft manufacturing facilities, essentially their version of mission control, their astronaut training facilities, and all of that is located in the Beijing metro area. And then we were taken out to the Gobi Desert later in our trip to their main launch site, so where the vast majority of their launches were taking place, and even still today, where their manned human spaceflight missions emanate out of. So it was a very interesting experience. They were quite open with what they were showing us. That said, they weren't in the middle of a heated launch campaign season or anything like that. So there really wasn't a lot of mission-related activity going on. So we saw a lot of facilities that were not in the middle of being used right now. For example, their mission control center, you didn't see a bunch of people overseeing a console while a mission was going on. When we were out at their launch site, we didn't see launch vehicles being stacked. Even in their vehicle assembly buildings, there weren't even elements of launch vehicles waiting to be stacked. We did, though, we're fortunate enough to see in their spacecraft manufacturing facilities the initial development and construction of their first man-tended or human-tended station, Tang-1, under construction. So it was eye-opening on a variety of different levels.
I don't know much about the Tang-1 at all. I mean, what did you see? It was in development, right? So what did you see when you saw it?
You know, as you know, I'm not a aerospace engineer, but it doesn't take an aerospace engineering degree. If you look at the heritage Soviet/Russian human spaceflight hardware, whether it's the Soyuz or their early space stations, the Salyuts, even onto the Mir program, there is a marked similarity in vehicle layout and design. So they were clearly basing their vehicle designs on a proven design that was pioneered by the Russians. In many ways, though, the Chinese had the benefit of being having a more robust economy. They clearly appear to be investing more in updating and modernizing not only their facilities newer, but the hardware under construction. It looked like a newer version of all those heritage Russian systems, making their own improvements on them. You know, we're hearing a lot of talk right now about China and cooperation. They had just recently announced that they want to do a lunar research station with the Russians, and they have a number of early signatories for that initiative. They weren't really talking that much about that. They were focused more at the time on getting routine operations for the manned Shenzhou missions and get the Tang-1 up there and start having some modicum of routine human-tended sustained space operations in low Earth orbit. But at the time, we, the United States, were still operating the shuttles and finishing off completion of our space station. And a few times they half-jokingly but half-seriously asked for us to carry messages back to our government that we, the United States, do not have to be solely dependent on Russian vehicles for access and support of the space station, and that they would be happy to talk with our government about them being partners in our space station, and so we wouldn't be as beholden to our Russian partners. So,
wow, how things have changed. I was just thinking 2009 was not, in my mind, it was not that long ago, but boy, that is quite a change from now. My goodness. What were your takeaways thinking on it now? I mean, when you got back, it was just, sounds extremely, it was extremely impressive. The scale of it, the pace of innovation. When you think back on it now, and especially given the breakneck speed at which China is developing their space program, I mean, do you feel like you're seeing it as it was ramping?
Yeah, they're people that get overly excited here. Essentially, tomorrow we're going to wake up and see a Chinese lunar base, and we're just going to be like, where did this come from? You know, we're totally surprised. You know, you always hear the oft-mentioned Sputnik moment. The Chinese are going at their own pace. You know, they have failures just like everyone else. They have setbacks, but like everyone else, we don't hear about them as much or to the degree. Thankfully, they haven't lost any people in their program the way we have, and at times the Russians have. But they're proceeding on their own timeline, and you know, every time there's a milestone that's reached, I don't get too surprised about it. I'm like, well, they're kind of going along on their own schedule. They're reaching their technical milestones, and but they're also taking a page from our playbook again now. We're trying to internationalize the program and get partners involved with their programs, and you know, we can't be willfully ignorant. I think since it is congressional budget season, at every Space Force hearing this year and every NASA hearing that we see this year, we're going to see China and China's progress in space be routinely brought up by members of the House and Senate that care about that. And you can't ignore the fact that their program, in many ways like ours, is dual use, and they are utilizing space much in the same way as we are in terms of, yes, there is scientific knowledge, expansion, and development, but there's also military and intelligence applications that can be derived from investment in such systems.
Yes, absolutely. You know, we often, from the U.S. perspective, we talk about what China has sort of learned from us. I'm wondering, how is that conversation going from your perspective in the opposite direction? Like, are we trying to learn anything from what China's doing? I don't mean from an intelligence point of view. I mean, just on a macro level. You know, like, are we saying, hey, that's a really good idea. You know, we should be taking some notes from how they're operating, aside from money.
well, and let's be honest. At least, you know, I'll never forget one time. This is even further back in the past. I sat in a Senate hearing on a NASA budget hearing, and I was sitting next to a gentleman, and I couldn't help but notice he was taking notes half in English and half in Chinese. And every now and then there'd be some NASA jargon thrown around, and he, in a very heavily accented English, would lean over to me and ask what was just said. And he was from the Chinese embassy, going to a hearing that is open to anyone on the U.S. Congress about Congress conducting oversight on NASA. None of us can do anything the same. None of us can go to Beijing and ask for similar deliberative discussions going on how much the PLA is going to be spending on their human spaceflight program and why, or who's critical of it and why, or who's a supporter of it and why. The interesting thing about space is that it's one of a seemingly endless number of domains that we're competing with the Chinese on, whether it's economic competitiveness, the fentanyl problem, TikTok, what's going on in the South China Sea, their Belt and Road Initiative, They're in a trade war right now with the Europeans. The Europeans are accusing them of dumping Chinese-built electric vehicles into their European automobile market. So space is just one of many things that policymakers in the United States have to keep an eye on. They don't have the transparency that we do. I think there's probably ways, though, that they can still be engaged with respect to sharing kind of, I don't want to say simple data, but things where there's areas of shared concern, such as debris mitigation, climate monitoring. We're doing our best to try to lead by example and set rules for the road. That's why I think you're seeing Space Force, at least notionally, talking about the idea of, modes of operation in cislunar space, because the one thing you keep hearing policymakers on both sides say here in Washington is that if we do let China get there, wherever there is first, they're going to start dictating what the rules of the road may be. And much as how we see how they conduct themselves on the high seas lately, which it always accrues to their benefit at the expense of other nation states. The concern is that they will do things that benefit solely themselves, and at the expense of everyone else.
To me, it is amazing how much things have changed in a geopolitical point of view, just since the time we were talking about, 2009. How much, I think, had we thought about what was going on back then, I think the word cooperation would have been much more prominent, and it seems more competition is the name of the game now, putting it politely. So it's fascinating.
Yeah, well, there's obviously the oft referred to Wolf Amendment that kind of governs NASA's cooperation, or limits the ability, or prohibits NASA's ability to cooperate with China. But I do think there are things that can be done to build trust and confidence. I don't think it's been any time recent, but I know in years past, there's been times where in the military, there's a thing called mill-to-mill exchanges, where officers from different militaries can go visit and tour facilities and see assets of different countries. And to a certain degree, the United States has done those exchanges with the PLA. I don't think there's been any time recently, but it's better to keep the lines of communication open, and then to be operating in total ignorance of each other. I mean, cheapers creepers. If you look at how tense things have been with the Russians over the past 15 years at least, we're still flying a space station together.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, I mean, it's almost like the Russians and the United States, where we were in a constant state of marriage counseling, and the space station is the child we both care about. We don't want to have anything bad happen to the child.
Oh, but when ISS gets deorbited, then what? Yeah.
ISS goes off to college and does its own thing or whatever.
Now we're all sad again. Yeah. We'll be right back.
And now a word from our sponsor, Netscope. Netscope is a worldwide leader in SASE and Zero Trust. Its unified platform, Netscope One, provides optimized access and Zero Trust security for people, devices, and data anywhere they go, helping customers reduce risk, accelerate performance, and get unrivaled visibility into any cloud, web, and private application activity. To learn more about how Netscope helps customers be ready for anything on their SASE journey, visit netskope.com.
Welcome back. This next story will either be inspiring to all of you overachievers out there, or just plain impressive for all the rest of us who are just kind of mid. It's pretty freaking impressive on its own just to be an Olympic athlete. Unbelievable dedication to your sport and athletic ability. Olympians really are the best of the best, aren't they? And U.S. Olympian Hans Henken, who will be competing in this summer's Paris Olympics in sailing, says, yeah, that's very exciting and everything, but what about after the Olympics? Resting on his laurels? Absolutely not. How's about going on to become an astronaut? Well, that's what Henkin has been hoping for since his childhood. And now that his Olympic dreams are just months away, he says his astronaut dreams are the next challenge he's going to tackle. And this is not some wild dream either. He's got the qualifications. He has an undergraduate and master's degree from Stanford in aeronautical and astronautical engineering. By the way, he competed in the varsity sailing team while studying, and that's how he made his way to the Olympics. That is seriously amazing. You might remember that the recent NASA astronaut candidate application cycle just ended. And if you're wondering if Hans Henkin applied, the answer is no. He says after concentrating for so long on his sailing career, after the Olympics, he wants to get some serious space industry expertise under his belt. Hopefully by, and I quote, building really, really cool engineering designs that help with space transportation. Well, there's always 4 years from now when ASCAN applications open up again. And if he is accepted in the class, he'd be joining the ranks of a fellow Olympian and 2021 astronaut candidate class graduate, Christina Birch. My unending admiration for these paragons of human achievement who look at two superbly difficult things, becoming an Olympic athlete and becoming a NASA astronaut, and say, why not both? And that's it for T-Minus for May 7th, 2024. Brought to you by N2K Cyberwire. For additional resources from today's report, check out our show notes at space.n2k.com. We're privileged that N2K and podcasts like T-Minus are part of the daily routine of many of the most influential leaders and operators in the public and private sector, from the Fortune 500 to many of the world's preeminent intelligence and law enforcement agencies. This episode was produced by Alice Carruth. Our associate producer is Liz Stokes. We're mixed by Elliot Peltzman and Trey Hester, with original music by Elliot Peltzman. Our executive producer is Jennifer Iben. Our executive editor is Brandon Karpf. Simone Petrella is our president. Peter Kilpie is our publisher. And I'm Maria Varmazes. Thanks for listening. We'll see you tomorrow.